The following program, The Russ Belville Show, is intended for responsible adults only. We advocate to the repeal of marijuana prohibition for adults. We discuss the science, culture, and controversy about America's marijuana laws. We do not advocate any illegal activity and encourage all listeners to learn their state and federal marijuana laws. Opinions and claims made by guests and advertisers on The Russ Belville Show are their own, and The Russ Belville Show cannot be held legally responsible for their validity or reliability. Viewer discretion is advised.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
From the promise of legalization
And I think that we need to rethink it and criminalize our marijuana.
to the agony of prohibition.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
Yeah, I hear you had a question for me.
Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
All right, good day, tokers and tokettes, and welcome. It is Tuesday, March 12th, 2013, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Thanks for joining us here. Just got finished talking on Huffington Post Live. I hope you all got a chance to enjoy that segment on drug testing. Nice speaking with Rick Cusick, by the way, as well. Here in the studio, got myself. We got Brian the Red hanging out. How you doing, Brian?
Hey, I'm doing all right.
We are doing our best to try to dispose of Schedule I drugs in a controlled burning manner.
Yes, mini controlled burns.
Hey, for today, we've got kind of a special show because, as you know, tomorrow I am flying out to Atlanta, Georgia to take part in the Southern Cannabis Reform Conference. And really looking forward to that. I have two presentations that I'm doing. On Friday, I'm doing the Debunking Goldilocks presentation. And on Saturday, I'm doing the 420 Drug War oral drug test, is what I'm calling it now. The 420radio.org oral drug test. So we'll do that on Saturday, and we'll record all of this to bring back to you next week. But for today, what I wanted to do is to give you a special presentation of my presentation, Debunking Goldilocks, the New Drug War Rhetoric, how to rebut and analyze the tactics of Kevin Sabet and Project Sam. Going to play that in its entirety for you here. Thanks for all of you for supporting the Russ Belville Show, and we'll switch over to that slideshow just as soon as I get this set up. Here we go. Debunking Goldilocks, the New Drug War Rhetoric, Analysis and Rebuttal. Oh, well, all right, got a couple things to set. Hold on, let me get this all set up first, and then we'll say it's a go. You know how technology is. One moment, and we will switch to the screen, and here we go. Let's start that. For the third way, kinder, gentler drug. Let's restart that, shall we? That's not what I wanted either. All right, one more try. We'll get this. Here we go. Debunking Goldilocks, the New Drug War Rhetoric. Debunking Goldilocks, the New Drug War Rhetoric. Analysis and rebuttal for the third way, kinder, gentler drug war strategies advocated by Kevin Sabet and Project Sam. By Russ Belville, Executive Director of 420radio.org and host of The Russ Belville Show at radicalruss.com. This is Dr. Kevin Sabet, Ph.D. I met him 1 year ago in Houston, Texas, as we faced off in a marijuana legalization debate at the Baker Institute. He had been the right-hand man to drug czar Gil Kurlikowski from 2009 to 2011. Currently, he is the director of the Drug Policy Institute at the University of Florida. He has dedicated his doctoral thesis and entire career to shaping the debate on drug policy to maintain drug prohibition. Sabet is dangerous to the marijuana legalization movement because he does not come off to the mainstream as a reefer-mad drug warrior. He has smartly crafted a message that co-opts some of our talking points, subverts some of our support, and obfuscates everything else, just enough to dissuade low-information voters from supporting legalization. His weakness, however, is the Internet. In 2012, Massachusetts was ready to vote on Question 3 to legalize medical marijuana use. Polls showed support above 60%. No major organizations were stepping up to vocally oppose the measure. So Kevin Sabet decided to step into the fray and announce the launch of Vote No on Question 3, a political action committee that would foreshadow the propaganda organ he's built now with Project Sam. Unfortunately for him, he did not bother to secure the web domain name VoteNoOnQuestion3.org before a Boston activist named Mike Crawford did. The result was this website that garnered national media attention and forced Sabet to publicly admit his embarrassment. The site was VoteNoOnQuestion3.org, and it featured such satirical headlines as Fact: Marijuana is the gateway drug to Twinkies. Fact: A healthy body is the devil's workshop. Fact: No marijuana smoker has ever become successful. Fact: The Mayans believe the world will end in 2012 because of marijuana. Fact: Local drug dealers union says vote no on Question 3. Elementary school counselor Mr. Mackey speaks out against medical marijuana. And fact: The Boston Red Sox are in last place because of Question 3. So after Massachusetts passed Question 3 with 63% of the vote, and Colorado and Washington passed outright adult legalization with 55% of the vote in November of 2012, Kevin says he was contacted by former Massachusetts Representative Patrick Kennedy. The two worried about the onslaught of pot zombies about to be unleashed and set about crafting a new, kinder, gentler drug war strategy that would surrender some of the most indefensible elements of the drug war, like mandatory minimum sentencing and marijuana possession arrests, in order to redirect the public's interest in drug law reform to maintaining a drug test and rehab-based marijuana prohibition. This is the official Project Sam website at learnaboutsam.com. There are sections here for their 4 pillars of policy recommendations, which include 1. Informing the debate with today's latest science on cannabis, at least that which scares people about cannabis. 2. Reducing the most indefensible consequences of marijuana arrests, so that prohibition can be maintained. 3. Preventing the establishment of a marijuana market, which they call Big Marijuana, and link to Big Tobacco at every turn. And 4. Promoting research into cannabis-based pharmaceuticals, so they can get those sick and dying people off the news and out of the legislatures with an effective, non-smoked cannaceutical that doesn't include the high. On their link for cannabis-based medicines, you'll see an example. Opium has medical value, and it is called morphine. Marijuana has medical value too, but just as we don't smoke opium to receive beneficial effects, we need not smoke marijuana to get its medical value. Project Sam. So I took a page from Mike Cann's playbook and secured the website, Twitter name, and Facebook page for smartapproaches.com. The website is a complete mock-up of the entire learnaboutsam.com in both structure and content. Basically, I take every article they write and pass it through a Stephen Colbert transmogrifier. However, all my articles take their exact points and debunk them with hyperlinks to the statistics and studies that prove the point. From this experience, I have learned 2 lessons. 1. How to read between the lines of all the propaganda being put forth by Kevin Sabet and Project Sam. And 2. There are some people who support marijuana legalization who do not get satire. Here's my example for cannabis-based medicines. Willow bark has medical value, and it is called aspirin. Marijuana has medical value too, and just as we should arrest those who grow willow bark to receive its beneficial effects, we should arrest those who grow marijuana to get its medical value. Project Samuel. In rhetoric, we have an important concept called frames. These are the neuro-linguistic concepts in which our debates live. For instance, in traditional politics, conservatives tend to think and operate from a frame of individual freedoms, and liberals tend to think and operate from a frame of collective responsibilities. Frames aren't about what's right or wrong, they're about how you see the world and project that understanding to others. The problem for our opponents is The tough on crime, war on drugs, and just say no frames they've had so much success with in the past are no longer working. We've successfully changed the frames to safer than alcohol, tax and regulate, and medical cannabis patient, and they can no longer compete with their old rhetoric. Now, thanks to Kevin Sabet's work, the ONDCP and Project SAM are rolling out a new, kinder, gentler drug war frame that triangulates their old frames and our new frames by painting both as two extremes and places their treatment and prevention frames as the third way, reasonable middle ground.
That means we would reject either extreme dichotomy, and that's what Project SAM is about. On the one hand, old policies of incarceration and prohibition, but on the other hand, what is sort of being rebranded as new, but is not new, legalization.
We've either got to lock them up or light it up. There is no kind of middle ground here, and that's what I hope to engender through this campaign.
This is an example of a logical fallacy called a straw man. The idea is to present our argument in a false manner in order to make it easy to defeat. They're claiming that we're arguing another type of fallacy called a false dichotomy, an argument where only two either-or choices are given when there are more than two choices. They know only 7% of the public believes we're winning the war on drugs, so demonize that and legalization in the same argument. Then Project SAM can ride in like the cavalry with the reasonable middle ground solution, allowing people who are turned off by drug war but wary of legalization a campaign to rally around. The quickest debunk of this is to remove the prohibition and legalization frames from the statement. The former conjures up Al Capone, and the latter reminds people of hippies. Instead, either adults are allowed to use a substance safer than alcohol, or they are punished for using a substance safer than alcohol. This offers a preemptive strike against their send them to rehab goals by placing it in the punishing adults who choose marijuana frame that they don't like. One strategy I find effective I call rhetorical jiu-jitsu. In the martial art of jiu-jitsu, one uses the opponent's force against him by redirection. In the false dichotomy of prohibition or legalization, they are priming the listener to reject this debate as a binary, legal or illegal debate. Accepting their third way compels the listener to accept that marijuana should remain illegal. So bring it back to the personal. This isn't a debate about whether pot should be legal or not. It is whether people who have pot should be punished or not. When you can redirect their activation of the legal or illegal frame from impersonal policy wonkery to punishing people for choosing a substance safer than alcohol, you simultaneously use their force against them and place them back in a Chicken Little frame. The sky is falling, where they've been since Prop 215 passed in 1996.
We're not saying reefer madness type arguments that if you smoke marijuana you're going to immediately do heroin or you're going to die. We're not saying that.
One of the facts about neurolinguistics is that frames activate mental imagery even when the frame is negated. Quick, don't think of an elephant. What's the first picture that just popped into your mind? I doubt it was a rhinoceros. So when Kevin Sabet is saying, this is not reefer madness, what is the first thing the listeners thought of? Now, this is part of his triangulation strategy, painting the drug war side as reefer madness, trying to appropriate the frame we've used so well against the drug war, so he can say he's not like that. So if he wants to play in our frames, keep him there. Is it not reefer madness to assume we can't trust adults to handle a substance safer than alcohol? The taxing of marijuana has become one of the most popular reasons why people who don't smoke marijuana support legalizing it. Sabet needs to paint the tax revenue as a false hope. He wants to confuse the listener by conflating the costs of legal alcohol and tobacco with legal marijuana. If you're not paying attention to how much marijuana prohibition is costing us, you might be convinced that we can't afford to legalize marijuana. This is a little shell game I like to call the Sabet conjecture. We'd all be better off not making any tax revenue off of marijuana sales.
For every dollar we get on alcohol and tobacco tax in this country, we spend $10 in lost social costs. So people that look at this know this is actually a loss leader.
People say, who are proposing this, that it's going to create a new revenue stream. But we know what the revenue stream in alcohol has done. For every dollar we bring in for alcohol revenue, we spend 10 in our emergency rooms, in drunk driving accidents, in domestic violence.
For every dollar in taxes, we spend 10 in social costs.
This is a logical fallacy of the false analogy. The idea is that legal alcohol and legal tobacco only bring in 1/10 in taxes what they cost society in social costs. Therefore, legalizing marijuana would turn out the same way. However, this ignores 3 facts. 1. Alcohol leads to violence, car wrecks, and cirrhosis. Tobacco leads to lung cancer, emphysema, and illness. And marijuana leads to jazz, donuts, and a nap. 2. Marijuana already exists. Legalization doesn't suddenly create costs from marijuana that we aren't already paying while bringing in no tax revenue. And 3, we're spending tax money trying in vain to stop it. How much more social costs would we suffer if alcohol and tobacco were prohibited? The quick debunk of the Sabbat conjecture is to simply say yes, alcohol and tobacco cost more because they are toxic and addictive. Whatever marijuana costs, we're paying that now and bringing in 0 tax money and spending billions more trying to stop it. For backup, you can turn to this study from the Center for Addictions Research of British Columbia. They found in 2002 that one tobacco smoker cost Canada $822 per year in healthcare costs. A drinker cost $165. A pot smoker cost $20. Meanwhile, Canada spends $328 per pot smoker on prohibition enforcement. So sure, alcohol and tobacco bring in less money than they cost, but a drinker costs 8 times more, and a smoker costs 40 times more than what a pot smoker costs. Certainly we can find a way to make $20 in taxes in a year off of a pot smoker.
The lottery, we've heard about it for gambling, we've heard about it for tobacco, we've heard about it for alcohol.
Sure, most pot smokers buy small amounts from friends, but as a friend of mine once noted, small amounts come from large amounts, and large amounts come from large grows, and that's what supports 15 to 26% of the cartel's income. The question isn't whether making the marijuana market legal ends organized crime. It's why are we allowing organized crime to run our marijuana market? Another tactic used by the kinder, gentler drug warriors is guilt by association. The idea of taxing marijuana has become popular as states are struggling to balance budgets. The prohibitionists want the people to think the cost of these tax revenues will be too great to bear. By bringing up the specter of big tobacco, prohibitionists have a frame to play in where the tax revenues we receive from tobacco cost us in addiction and death, allowed an industry to lie for decades about the harmfulness of its products, and created a market that preys on children. Then, the fear of big tobacco can be transferred onto a straw man of big marijuana to fear.
It's already in 18 states. It's going even further. And before we know it, we're going to wake up one day and we're going to have another tobacco industry. It's going to be called the marijuana industry. We already know what big tobacco did to our kids. Joe Camel targeting kids.
Have you seen this camel? Joseph, or Joe Camel, is a 6'2" brown-haired anthropomorphic dromedary with a face resembling male genitalia. Last seen wearing Tom Cruise's sunglasses and Don Johnson's Miami Vice wardrobe. He has been missing since 1998, along with his associate, the Marlboro Man. He used to be found hanging out at NASCAR's Winston Cup Racing Series, and was last seen in magazine and television advertisements in the 20th century.
Let's look at our cigarette policy over the last 80 years and not forget what happened. We had big tobacco, peddling tobacco, saying, first of all, it's medicine. You know, in the 50s, tobacco was medicine. It's pretty interesting now with marijuana. They downplayed the harms to kids. They actually make money off of addiction. That is no model for marijuana.
The big tobacco analogy is one we can also use rhetorical jujitsu on. We can agree to some of the harms we saw from big tobacco, like marketing to kids, and point out how that makes a perfect guidebook for what not to do as we legalize marijuana. Then point out that big tobacco had to lie about its product because its product is toxic and addictive. This would be the time to point out that in 2006, Dr. Donald Tashkin, working for the National Institutes on Drug Abuse, studied marijuana smoking for 30 years to find a link to lung cancer, and not only didn't find a link, but found that pot smokers had less incidence of head, neck, and lung cancer. Since we learned all those lessons from 80 years of big tobacco, Why wouldn't we strictly regulate marijuana marketing from the start of the industry?
I think it'll be a mess with our First Amendment to allow marijuana legalization. We didn't have a First Amendment, we could maybe talk.
In 1965, the Federal Cigarette Labeling and Advertising Act required warning labels on cigarette packs. In 1967, the FCC required TV stations to run anti-smoking spots for free. In 1970, the Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act banned the advertising of cigarettes on television and radio and added warnings to print ads. In 1984, the Comprehensive Smoking Education Act mandated more warnings on all advertisements. In 1997, we sued Big Tobacco, and from that, the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement banned outdoor billboard and public transportation advertising of cigarettes in 46 states. It also prohibits tobacco advertising that targets young people, the usage of cartoons, such as The Marlboro Man or Joe Camel, in particular. And in 2010, the Tobacco Control Act required all audio and video ads to contain no music, no sound effects, no images, and no color. Yet we still have a First Amendment, and all those acts are constitutional. Big Tobacco doesn't tell us what big marijuana will be, but we can take a look at what big marijuana is like right now. And fair warning, you may not want to see this next slide if you're sensitive to gore. We can have a big marijuana that, like big tobacco, pays taxes, creates jobs, and settles its disputes in courtrooms with lawyers. Or we can keep the current big marijuana that launders money, corrupts police, and settles its disputes with plata o plomo, a bribe or a bullet. The marijuana market is never going away, and Kevin Sabet's Project Sam proposals do nothing to address the market, leaving it to the murderous Mexican terrorists who traffic marijuana, the underground domestic growers who don't pay taxes, and the teenage marijuana dealers who take the best-paying job on the streets. With this rhetorical move, we give the listener a greater fear than big tobacco. Aren't you less afraid of Joe Camel than Los Zetas cartel?
A prohibition around violence does not come from marijuana. Let's be very clear. The marijuana trade is not especially violent. Most people do not buy pot. They get it from a friend or family member. 15% of cartels, according to RAND, 15 to 20% get it from marijuana. Big enough chunk to worry about? Yeah, right. Big enough chunk to worry about, not the vast majority. If you're worried about organized crime, though, the answer is not in marijuana. That's just not where the action is. It's in the other drug.
Oh, fuck it. One of the ways of confusing the debate about marijuana legalization is to frame it as if we are offering people a new choice on the menu of recreational substances. Given that we have two choices already, alcohol and tobacco, and we have so many demonstrable harms from those, why should we offer people another harmful choice on the menu? This way, the harms from alcohol and tobacco that arise from their pharmacology, the fact that they're toxic and addictive, can be attributed to their legality, making it seem as if legality is what would bring further harm from marijuana.
I don't think we need a new legalized drug in our country. Michael Bloomberg's taking OxyContin off the shelves in New York City. We have enormous epidemic of addiction and abuse, and then the thought that we would introduce a new legalized drug, to me, just doesn't make any sense.
We already have enough problems with our two legal drugs, alcohol and tobacco. They're widely promoted by an industry that lives off of other people's addiction. They're widely normalized, advertised. I don't think we need another problem in society, and marijuana would do that.
First of all, there aren't just two legal recreational substances. Caffeine is a substance we enjoy in coffee and soda. Sugar is a substance we enjoy in candy and soda. If you don't think those are mind-altering and mood-altering drugs, then let me give your 5-year-old a Mountain Dew while we discuss it. While you can be quite addicted to those substances, and they do cause healthcare costs to our society, nobody's considering locking people up who drink Mountain Dew, except maybe New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. Second, we're not talking about introducing a brand new drug nobody's ever heard of before. Marijuana's here, and 26 million people are smoking it. The only question is who controls and benefits from the market, criminals or taxpayers?
We see prescription drugs today are legal and they're available. Alcohol is legal, available, and so is tobacco. And we're doing a pretty bad job of preventing and treating those three legal drugs.
An interesting bit of framing by Project Sam is to paint legalization as a hopeless option. Sabet will point out either the poor job we do controlling alcohol, since there are so many drunk drivers and other costs, or the poor job we do controlling OxyContin or other prescription drugs, since there is now an epidemic of prescription drug abuse. For this, fall back to the point that those drugs are incredibly addictive and have massive withdrawal effects. Comparing marijuana to OxyContin is like comparing apples to, well, OxyContin.
More people are arrested for alcohol offenses every year than all drugs combined because more people use alcohol and it's much more prevalent.
Lately, Kevin Sabet has been confusing people by pointing out how many arrests there are for alcohol violations. This is a continuation of the hopeless option false analogy, the idea being that legal marijuana wouldn't save any law enforcement money because there'd be more arrests for legal marijuana than prohibited marijuana. Of course, for this to be effective, you must ignore that many alcohol arrests are for actual crimes, like DUI or assault, that are caused by alcohol and would exist even under prohibition. And other arrests are for violations, like underage possession or selling to minors, which are the whole reason for having regulations in the first place. Flip this frame on them by asking, how many arrests for alcohol would we have if we prohibited it like marijuana?
27% of Americans still smoke. 1 out of 4 Americans. Over 55% of Americans drink. How many people smoke marijuana? Our household surveys say about 8% of people are regular users. So, something about illegality does drive use down.
This is the logical fallacy of post hoc ergo propter hoc, meaning since this happened, then that happened, this caused that. The fact that alcohol and tobacco are popular and legal does not mean they are popular because they are legal. The fact that marijuana isn't as popular isn't because it is prohibited. It's more prohibited than cocaine and meth, but far more people smoke pot. Again, remind the listener that alcohol and tobacco are highly addictive. That's part of the reason so many use those. Marijuana use has become more popular over the past 4 decades, even though it's illegal. And whether there are more marijuana smokers after legalization is irrelevant without considering how many of them are choosing marijuana over alcohol or prescription medications, and how much net good that will accomplish.
So this notion that we're going to give the green light of permissibility for people to think, oh, it's harmless, go ahead and experiment. Now, we know kids have access to this anyway, but we shouldn't be adding fuel to the fire.
Cigarette smoking may be the greatest example of the use of strict regulations, public education, and social pressure to reduce the harms from drug use. An activity that used to be commonplace in restaurants, boardrooms, and airplanes is now one that is prohibited nearly everywhere indoors and relegated to special zones outdoors. Cigarettes that used to be easy for kids to buy or steal are now placed behind locked counters where adult cashiers consistently check for proper ID. The glamour and cool of the cigarette smoker has been replaced with public service campaigns that portray the shocking health effects from smoking. This has been successful despite nicotine being one of the most addictive drugs, sold by massively profitable corporations and available to people at age 18 in most states. So much so that today, more high school seniors have tried smoking marijuana than have tried smoking tobacco.
We know that when drugs are legal, they're cheaper, they're more available, then they're promoted.
Since 1981, the price it costs for a pure gram of heroin, adjusted for inflation, has dropped over 80%. The price of cocaine has dropped 80%, and crack cocaine has dropped 60%. Since the government started tracking meth in 1986, its price has dropped almost 60%. The only drug that got more expensive over 3 decades of prohibition was marijuana, which increased over 80%. And all drugs are more potent. Cocaine and meth are more pure, heroin's more than tripled in purity, and marijuana potency has more than doubled. All right, we're going to take a little break here so that I can fix whatever that echo problem is with the presentation. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show here on 420radio.org. We're going to take a short break. Even though it's past 20 after, we have rules, and we're going to conform to them. So Brian the Red, he's taking care of business. We'll be right back with part 2 of the presentation. Stay tuned.
Oh, have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. Have you ever met that funny reefer man? A reefer man. If he said he swam to China, he would sell you South Carolina. Then you know you're talking to that reefer man.
Big Daddy thinks.
Funky roller rink, roller rink, roller rink.
Here at the Funky Roller Rink, it's always cool.
They call me cool, 'cause I got more glide in my stride and more dip in my hip.
Oh yeah, fun.
And I wear a mean dark pair of shades, and you can't see my eyes unless my head is bent. No time, give me 5. They call me cool, Mr. Cool.
Everyone knows music and marijuana go together, so let's wind up our 20 after break with the Russ Belville Show's Daily Toker Tunes, the best in pod-safe 420 music from around the web. Today is Electric Tuesday, featuring the latest in electronic dance music and other cutting-edge genres. You can get downloads and more information about all our Daily Toker Tunes by visiting music.radicalruss.com. Now, sit back and enjoy your Daily Toker Tunes.
Well, we would be sitting back and enjoying our Daily Toker Tunes, except for the fact that we're smack dab in the middle of the presentation, and I had to solve that problem with the echo. Little PowerPoint deal there, but we got that fixed. And if you're watching this presentation and you're liking what you see so far, this presentation is going to be for sale in PowerPoint format, completely self-contained, with full notes, all the videos, audio files that I'm not playing, and my narration. And my recorded narration and the hyperlinks to the original studies. So if you want to get a copy of this presentation, we'll have it for sale one of 2 ways. I haven't decided how I'm going to market it yet, but we'll have it for sale here at 420radio.org. We'll also have a full video of it. And what's nice about the PowerPoint presentation is that you can run it at a kiosk mode, where it just runs itself and it has my narration. You can run it manually yourself, narrate it yourself. You can hide certain sections of it. If you don't want to run a certain section, you can just skip or hide that section. It's one of the best PowerPoint presentations, if I do say so myself, that I've ever put together. So I'm going to offer this for sale and make this a tool that activists all across the country can get a benefit out of. We're going to return back to the presentation here just as soon as I can get it set up. Basically, we left off waiting to talk about the not your father's Woodstock weed that we're supposed to be so scared of. Let's go back to the presentation. A year ago, I debated Kevin Sabet. And during my presentation, I paraphrased the fear-mongering about the new, supposedly genetically modified, hyper-potent skunk we grow in the Pacific Northwest these days with the catchphrase, "This is not your father's Woodstock weed." Unfortunately, he latched onto that and is using it to frighten the baby boomer generation. So their positive experiences with marijuana won't apply to this new super potent marijuana. I forgot that drug warriors are not particularly creative, and I apologize for letting him have this freebie.
But I think the pendulum has swung way too far, and everyone thinks, oh, marijuana's not that bad. It's much stronger than the Woodstock marijuana that was 20, 30 years ago.
Today's pot is not the Woodstock weed our parents smoked in their dorm room innocuously. It's 5 to 6 times greater in potency and strength.
I mean, we know that today's marijuana is not your marijuana of the Woodstock days of what people might have smoked in their dorms pretty harmlessly in the 60s or 70s. It's 5 to 7 times more potent.
This is Kevin Sabet's own PowerPoint slide from a presentation he gave a few years ago. It shows the average potency in seized marijuana from 1983, where it was around 4%, to 2009, where it was around 10%. That's over 2 times more potent, not the 5 to 7 times more potent. By his measure, we're supposed to believe that they were smoking 1.4% to 2% THC ditchweed at Woodstock. I've seen the Woodstock movie, and I find that very hard to believe. The reason why the Woodstock weed argument affects people is they analogize alcohol and marijuana. They understand the difference between low-potency beer and high-potency shots, and they know that a quart of beer will get you drunk, but a quart of Jack Daniels could kill you. So pot smokers of the past who fondly remember pot, but haven't used lately, might be scared into thinking today's pot is somehow different. Point out that there has always been Sinsemilla, Acapulco Gold, Maui Wowie, Panama Red, and so forth. And the difference is, with Woodstock weed, you used to smoke 2 or 3 joints to get high. Today, you smoke 2 or 3 puffs to get high. That means less harmful smoke, but no different high. One of the only points the drug warriors have left that resonates with the public is, what about the children, or WOTC? Nobody wants kids smoking pot, even we agree to that, and that allows the prohibitionists to put us on the defensive. This is where we can use a lesson from the art of war, or Karl Rove, and make our opponent's perceived strength into his greatest weakness. With WOTC, we need to show how maintaining marijuana prohibition is what truly puts the children at risk, and legalization is what will protect them.
We know that 1 out of every 6 kids that try marijuana will become addicted to it, okay? That's not 6 out of 6, but that's probably something and plenty to worry about.
This is one of Kevin's latest sound bites, and it requires careful debunking. We don't want to appear dismissive of people's legitimate concerns about keeping their kids away from marijuana. The key here is to place the blame on the current policy and show how legalization improves child safety. Ethan Nadelman has a great soundbite. We know that most people who try marijuana don't even go on to using more marijuana, much less any other drugs. I like to ask, should we return to alcohol prohibition because some kids turn out to be alcoholics? Then the pivot. If marijuana is something we want to keep from kids, shouldn't we put it in adults-only stores and check kids for ID? When I was a high school senior back in the 1980s, over 90% of high school seniors had taken an alcoholic drink in their lifetime. Over 70% of my peers had tried a cigarette. And even though I wasn't one of them, over half of my classmates had tried smoking pot. Now, after 18 states have passed medical marijuana and 2 states have legalized, far fewer kids do any of those drugs. Lifetime drinking has dropped from a high of 93.4% down to just 70%, partially thanks to the 21 drinking age and stricter carding. Lifetime tobacco use has dropped from a max of 75.8% to an all-time low of 40%, partially thanks to killing Joe Camel and making smokes harder to access. And marijuana use is lower now at 45% than the high of 60.4% in 1979, or even the modern high of 49.6% when California passed medical marijuana.
I get that only 1 out of 6 kids who try pot will become addicted to it, okay? I get that 5 out of 6 actually won't have that many problems. But I'm very concerned about that 1 out of 6 because they cause the problems, they cause the social costs, they cause the IQ drop, they cause the car crashes. And so our policies, I think, should be focused on that 1 out of 6 that can't handle it.
One way to puncture any marijuana policy argument is to repeat it with alcohol in place of marijuana. I get that kids who try alcohol have a 4 times greater risk of becoming alcoholics, okay? I get that most kids who drink won't become alcoholics, but I'm very concerned about the 15% of people who become alcoholics because they cause the problems, they cause the social costs, they get into fights, they cause the drunk drivings. And so we should arrest and force into treatment any adult that we catch drinking a beer?
Heavy persistent use leads to significant IQ loss among young people.
This is a recent study that has been heavily criticized, but never mind that. It is not our job to argue that marijuana use is safe, especially for kids. We're not arguing about legalizing marijuana use for kids. We're talking about putting marijuana in adults-only stores and checking kids for ID. Whatever harms there may be for kids using marijuana exist now under prohibition, and Kevin Sabet argues for maintaining that criminal prohibition for adults.
But in Oregon, where there's medical marijuana, kids can get a license.
These are videos of 7-year-old Michaela Comstock from my show. She is battling leukemia and uses medical cannabis oil capsules to deal with the nausea and pain. An hour earlier, she had a chemotherapy session. During the interview, she is munching down on some French fries.
My favorite food is apples and bananas.
Oh. You know, there's a song about apples and bananas. Have you ever sang that song?
No.
Yeah, okay, well maybe.
But I made a little one up. Apples and bananas, apples and bananas, apples and bananas, apples and bananas. Apples are my favorite. Apples are my favorite. And so are bananas, 'cause bananas are great for you.
So, this is kind of, one of the things about using cannabis as a medicine is that it scares some people. They're kind of afraid of it. And so what would you tell them as far as,
Don't be afraid.
Yeah? How come?
Because it helps other people that use it, and it helps me a lot.
These are videos of 11-year-old Alex Eccles and his dad, Jeremy. Alex suffers from autism and sometimes has seizures of rage that make him pound his head into walls and bite and scratch himself bloody. Jeremy has found some success in giving Alex a cannabis oil that leaves him relaxed and curious, but cannot get him a consistent supply or dose him at his group home.
He went from hitting himself, bloodying his face. Within an hour, hour and a half, he would be playing with toys, using his hands, something that at that time was almost unheard of.
It's an extremely rare occurrence for Alex.
And then we started figuring out that we were running out, and we realized we don't know anybody who has ever talked to us about pot. We just weren't those people. We were never involved in the underground. Yeah.
Like that. Okay.
So, I started talking to people that I worked with and found out, to my surprise, that basically every one of them was at least acquainted with marijuana at some point.
You were
in their
the one
lives.
guy who wasn't.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Wow. That's fantastic.
So these are software engineers. These are smart people.
Okay.
And I was just blown away. I was like, smart people? And you guys use this stuff recreationally? It definitely turned around my perception.
What about the children is the most powerful frame our opponents can use. It activates a natural instinct to protect our young that overrides rational higher thought processes. Keep reminding the listener that any harms they are conjuring about children and marijuana exist now because of the marijuana prohibition. You don't see any high school tequila dealers. Kids aren't making a lot of money selling cigarettes. If WOTC is the most powerful weapon in the drug war propaganda playbook, then SMOF is number 2, which stands for Stoned Mayhem on the Freeways. As reformers, we have to be empathetic to the goal of safer roads, and we can't be seen as claiming there is absolutely no risk from cannabis-impaired drivers. What we can do is present acute cannabis impairment, not the presence of metabolites in P or THC in the blood, as a risk, but one that is less troublesome than drinking or smartphone use. One roadblock we face is that we've been so successful with treat marijuana like alcohol that the public now wants the marijuana equivalent of the alcohol breathalyzer, and is fixed upon a number so low it merely discriminates against pot smokers who drive.
The British Medical Journal told us a few months ago that their most comprehensive study they've ever done showed that marijuana intoxication doubles your car crash risk.
Nobody is arguing for the right to pull bong rips and then get behind the wheel. Of course marijuana-impaired driving should remain illegal. Once again, Sabet's fear-mongering is only scary if you forget that marijuana exists now, and any driving risks exist now. With illegal marijuana, there are no friends don't let friends drive stoned ads. There is no modeling for responsible use. As for the study, it mentions that alcohol drivers are a much greater crash risk than cannabis drivers. It is also the kind of study called a meta-analysis that synthesizes many other previous studies that are wildly inconsistent with one another and ignore potential confounders, like the fact pot smokers tend to be young males who also tend to have the greatest crash risks. Since Washington State recently passed marijuana legalization with a THC limit for drivers set at 5 nanograms, there has been much controversy about whether this limit accurately represents a level at which pot smokers shouldn't drive. Thanks to marijuana being legal, a local news reporter in Seattle was able to set up a driving test course and filmed 3 pot smokers getting high and immediately getting behind the wheel. The story featured Addie, who smokes every day, Dylan, who smokes on weekends, and Jeff, who smokes once in a blue moon. Their driving was evaluated by an in-car driving instructor and a roadside sheriff's officer trained in recognizing drug-impaired drivers. Addie arrives to the test having smoked that day and way over the legal limit.
Our first volunteer, Addie, is a 27-year-old medical marijuana patient and heavy daily user who had smoked some pot prior to arriving. A blood test before our experiment began showed she came to the track already 3 times the new legal limit for driving under the influence of marijuana. The limit is 5 nanograms. She was at nearly 16 nanograms. While learning the course, Addie turned too sharp at a stop sign and clipped one of our cameras. But the instructor told us her driving was actually fine.
Each driver was tested when they arrived, and all of them passed the driving test, even though all-day Addie had 3 times the legal limit in her system. Weekend Dylan and Blue Moon Jeff had no marijuana in their system. Then, all 3 were allowed to smoke 0.3 grams of marijuana and were put back behind the wheel.
Back behind the wheel for another lap, Addie drove a bit slower than she should and at one point struck a traffic cone.
Oh, I hit a cone. I see it in the rearview mirror. Ah!
A blood test would later show Addie was driving at 7 times the legal limit for pot with 36.7 nanograms of marijuana in her system, but still driving okay.
I wouldn't pull her off the road, no. Not yet. Not this point.
After 0.3 of a gram of pot, Dylan was doing fine behind the wheel.
Ooh, that was fun.
Even though our lab tests would later reveal he was driving at 5 times the legal limit with 26 nanograms of pot in his system. When we got Jeff on the track, he was being cautious and driving slower than he should, which could catch the eye of a police officer on the road. His blood test showed Jeff was 4 times the legal limit with nearly 22 nanograms in his system. But again, his driving, while slow, was still at acceptable levels.
He did real well.
The news crew had quite the story with 3 pot smokers of varying ages and use patterns, all driving fine at more than 4 times the legal limit. But they decided to let the volunteers have 2 more 0.3 gram sessions and tested them after each. While Blue Moon Jeff and Weekend Dylan started having observable driving problems, all-day Addie was still able to function behind the wheel.
After 0.9 of a gram, Addie was becoming much more aggressive, excited about being high and behind the wheel.
One time in your life you get to do this, you should do it. Yeah. You should do it! Yeah. That's awesome.
But she made no major mistakes, and we asked the officer if he would pull her over.
Borderline.
While Smoth conjures up roadways littered with the wrecks of pot-smoking drivers, in truth, our roadways have never been safer. In 1994, over 23 people died in crashes per every 100 million miles driven in the United States. In 2010, that number was over 15, a drop of 1/3. Fatal crashes in Colorado and Washington have declined over 40%. Interestingly, while Colorado and Georgia had similar fatality rates in the 1990s, since medical marijuana, Colorado has seen a greater overall decline than Georgia. Correlation is not causation. Cars have become safer, for instance. But if the rapid spread of medical marijuana since 1996 has caused greater chance of accidents, we're not seeing that reflected in the national traffic statistics. We must also emphasize that marijuana users, unlike alcohol drinkers, can judge their relative impairment. This is a fact the government implicitly accepts in their warnings on a bottle of dronabinol. Those are the Schedule III legal version of THC in a pill called Marinol. The warning reads, in part, quote, "Patients receiving treatment with Marinol capsules should be specifically warned not to drive until it is established that they are able to tolerate the drug and perform such tasks safely." End quote. California's passage of Prop 215 in 1996 and the subsequent passage of medical marijuana laws in 17 other states and D.C. is the biggest hurdle the drug warriors have to clear. Over 80% of the public support allowing patients to use marijuana without arrest, and they can't oppose that without looking cruel. So, their key here is a divide and conquer strategy. First, the state medical marijuana programs must be shown to be reckless reactions to a medical potential from cannabis. Second, the obvious medical utility of cannabis must be diminished by paring away only the most sympathetic stories, cancer and AIDS, for example, from the vast majority using cannabis for pain and nausea. For those sympathetic patients, they can appear compassionate by calling for FDA-approved cannabis medications. The rest can be demonized as faking it to feed their marijuana addiction, leading us to their proposed third-way rehab solutions.
Well, that pro-marijuana lobby has pushed medical marijuana in terms of the sick and dying. The average medical marijuana user in California is a 32-year-old white male with no history of chronic illness.
Yeah.
They actually have a history of drug and alcohol abuse.
I differ with many in the movement about how to deal with California. From a medical standpoint, there is no doubt cannabis should be a medicine of first resort, since there are so many conditions it can alleviate, and it has such low risk. But rhetorically, California is our Achilles heel. We took on the frame of medical, and that conjures in the mind of the listener doctors with white coats, well-trained nurses, and medicines with exact doses, and so on. It most certainly does not conjure up bikini-clad sign twirlers, exams at rap concerts, and medicine judging contests.
In California, of those who are applying for licenses, 90% don't have cancer, don't have MS, don't have any of the things that you and I would associate with needing medical marijuana.
The people faking pain for medical marijuana theme is one that runs through all of Project Sam's rhetoric. One statistic Kevin Sabet likes to use is that 94% of medical marijuana patients are qualified for pain. This is true, but misleading. Indeed, in Oregon, 51,000 out of 54,500 patients registers pain as a qualifying condition. But what Sabet leaves out is that patients can qualify for more than one condition. Do you suppose cancer causes a bit of pain? In actuality, pain represents just 64% of the conditions being treated with medical marijuana in Oregon. If persons qualifying for their non-pain condition also put down pain, the number of pain-only patients in Oregon could be less than half.
When do we have to smoke it in order to get the benefits of the THC? Like, do we call on people to smoke opium in order to get narcotics? That's ridiculous.
Marijuana ain't opium. This is another fallacy of false analogy. If morphine, OxyContin, Percocet, Darvocet, and other opioid painkillers didn't exist, you can be sure that we'd support allowing people in enormous pain to smoke opium and not be arrested for it. The side effects from opium smoking are far more harmful than smoking marijuana. Part of this argument is to focus on smoked marijuana when we have so many better ways of preparing marijuana. Remind the listener about vaporization and that many medicines are inhaled, like asthma medications, because of the ease of administration and the speed of relief.
Let's make sure people with cancer get the kind of marijuana that's non-smoked that they need. We don't need to legalize smoked marijuana in order to do that.
This is the fallacy called no true Scotsman. The idea here is that marijuana can't be medicine because it hasn't gone through the standard FDA approval process that determines what we call medicine. If the FDA says it's a safe and effective medicine, like Vioxx, for example, then it is. And if they haven't, then it is not. If you point out all the medical benefits of marijuana use, even if you've experienced it yourself, you're wrong, because no true medicine is a raw smoked plant. This is where I like to point out that aspirin has never passed the FDA approval process. It kills hundreds every year, and nobody arrests people who grow willow trees, whether they chew the bark for salicylic acid or not. All right, so that's the presentation on Kevin Sabet. We're still going with that, and just taking a quick little break here before we hit the end of the hour. Want to thank all of you who are joining us here on this special edition of the Russ Belville Show. I'm preparing to go to Atlanta, Georgia, and this is a presentation I'm giving on Friday, and this is kind of the dress rehearsal. I'm running through it to make sure there's all the little glitches are taken care of, and there's still a couple slides I need to fix. But I want to thank you for listening to it, and if you have any suggestions or comments about the presentation, please let me know in the chat room. I'm watching the chat room while this is on. I'm trying to get feedback on this. If there's things that didn't make sense or could have been done better, I'm all cool with that. Going to tighten this up so that, again, it will be a presentation for sale. This will be available for the activists out there, and we'll put this in either our forums or our store or something. I don't know exactly how we're going to pull it off, but we're going to do it because I want to build these tools. I'm going to dedicate my life to ending drug testing, to ending marijuana prohibition, and for taking down Kevin Sabet. And I hope you all help me do that. If you got this and you can forward it to your friends and let other people know it. All sorts of great little sound bites in here, little statistics. And if you do get the presentation, it has hyperlinks to the actual government stats page, the study that I'm referring to, whatever it might be. Like I said, I really want to make this something that's a useful item, a nice piece in the toolbox there for activists everywhere, all across the country. It's also broken down into segments. As you can see, each segment starts with a title slide, and you can hide or move around the different segments in the presentation to fit your particular audience. In the future, I may take some of these segments and expand them a bit, make them into full-fledged presentations of their own. And I think this is kind of what I'm going to start developing. I'm kind of thinking to myself as maybe making the Rick Steves guidebooks for ending prohibition. He always says that getting high is a place. Well, maybe I'm the guy to be the travel guide to high. Worked for Rick Steves. Could work for me. That's all the time we got here in Hour 1, but stay tuned. We're going to wrap up the end of this presentation on debating the rhetoric of Project Sam and Kevin Sabet in our Hour 2 Toker Talk Radio. Plus, Brian Nared's got a story for us that we're going to take a look at. What's up with that?
Oh, just Little Tobacco trying to take money out of the government's pockets.
Little Tobacco. All right, we'll talk about Little Tobacco. And also, we'll take your calls at 971-533-7111. Don't forget, no live show tomorrow. I'll be flying to Atlanta. On Thursday, we're going to do everything we can to bring you a live show from Atlanta. And then no live show on Friday because I will be doing my presentation, and I got enough to worry about. For Behind the Red, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. Till next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.